Quite interesting and dynamic group of leaders here to talk about enabling e-commerce. And in particular, part of the context for this important session is enabling e-commerce initiative, which the World Trade Organization, EWTP, and the Forum's International Trade and Investment System Initiative, which engages a wide spectrum of companies, governments, and experts, are undertaking for the next year or two to try to enable the kinds of changes in both policy and private sector practices that can make trade more inclusive through e-commerce. There is something of a debate these days about whether e-commerce is going to be a vehicle for development or whether it's primarily going to benefit large and advanced economies and companies. And what I'd like to do is first introduce the panel and then get right into that discussion. First, we're privileged to have Therese Fernandez-Ruiz, who's president and founding partner of Rags to Riches from the Philippines, someone engaged in e-commerce domestically and internationally. Then, Your Excellency Mercedes Arauz, Prime Minister of Peru. Jack Ma, Executive Chairman of Alibaba Holding Group Limited, and Roberto Azevedo, Director General of the World Trade Organization. Why don't we start with you, a view from the actual conduct of business on the ground, Therese. How do you tell us a little bit about your story and the extent to which you see e-commerce providing opportunity and indeed some obstacles that you think could be worked on to make this a bigger opportunity for your customers and clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started 10 years ago in one of the biggest urban poor communities in the Philippines, where there were artisans, mostly stay-at-home mothers, who would weave rugs out of fabric. And they only earned about 20 cents US dollars a day. And anywhere in the world, that's nothing. And we thought that it was because of the middlemen. They couldn't get straight to the market, and they couldn't also get access to the supply. So we started Rags to Riches, or R2R, as a fashion and design house, empowering these community artisans to link them to the global market. So imagine from the slums in the Philippines, suddenly their products are in vogue or in the global stage. But there are so many barriers, for sure. Logistics, the usual barriers, logistics, payments. Imagine if all of these barriers are not there anymore. Because right now, we're making things work. Our artisans are having regular livelihood. But imagine the kind of impact that we could do if these barriers are not there anymore.
Right. Thank you very much. Prime Minister, we have seen a Pew Global Attitude survey that suggests that 81% of Peruvians see trade as benefiting the economy. What opportunities do you think e-commerce holds for building on that in your country?
Well, I think that when we started the process of trade liberalization in the country, people were like, oh no, we don't want this. But suddenly, especially says SMEs were the ones that say, no, we have a chance to start exporting to our neighboring countries at the beginning, then with the other countries, we started doing these FTAs, particularly US, then Europe and Asia, in which we're working very closely. Why? Because this is an interesting step to formalization, to the process of coming back and having opportunities to have better markets. So still we have to do a lot of work. We have to reduce the logistic cost, which are great. Still, we have a very bad index, 59% below our partners, so we have to work on that a lot. But for example, we started introducing in the postal office the service for SMEs, for small exports, a very low price, very cheap, and also with all the facilities. Also, we have in the trade agreements that we sign all the facilities for couriers, so they can come in and help our small firms. And in APEC, for example, we're moving ahead, pushing all the trade facilitation program, because we think that trade facilitation can help SMEs. In Latin America, we have an interesting case that was promoted by IDB and Mr. Jack Ma, which is Connect America, which also helps the Latin American companies, small firms, to get together through this platform, which is promoted by IDB and Google and Jack Ma. And in that way, also, these firms can get opportunities of credit which is important also for the trade facilitation process.
Okay, thanks. Jack Ma, there's still quite a significant digital divide out there. Nearly 4 billion people not yet connected. And so that leads, whenever there's a discussion among policymakers and others about e-commerce, it leads to a question mark as to whether the expansion of e-commerce may primarily benefit the advanced countries and the countries that are less developed in this regard. What's your thinking and your experience in that regard?
Yeah, my belief is e-commerce is the future, and e-commerce is going to replace a lot of traditional way of doing business. People say in the past 20 years, with poor logistic, terrible payment, terrible connection of the internet in the world, but still the e-commerce grow like this. For our platform alone in China in the past 15 years, people say, no logistics, no credit system, no financing, no this and no that. Even that, last year, our sales on our platform is more than 750 billion US dollars GMV sales. It's almost ranking number 21 country's GDP. Only 20 years, imagine, without a perfect logistics system, without a perfect payment system, without blockchain technology, it grow like this. What if the next 20 years, when all the technology is ready, when all the government and organizations and entrepreneurs are ready, they think this is a lifestyle. This is the way young people live, and it's going to be the future. So e-commerce is not for big company. E-commerce is not for the developed countries. E-commerce is for developing countries, for young people and small business. Because in the past days, young people don't have chance to compete. Small business, they don't have chance to compete with the big companies. And developing countries don't have chance to. Imagine that country like China can grow like this. I think Peru, a few years ago, I went there. That day, I remember I went to a square. People were demonstration. Right? I happened to be there. People hated the e-commerce. And suddenly there's a the Peru young man said, I using internet, and I sold my Peru products to New Zealand, Australia, which I never thought in my life could do it without internet. So it will be the future because young people love it.
Yes.
Anything young people love it, it has the future. That's my point.
Okay, thanks. Roberto Azevedo, you just came out last month of an important ministerial meeting in Buenos Aires, and there was a lot of discussion. Maybe some of the most discussion about any topic, as far as I could tell, was about e-commerce. Tell us a little bit about how the multilateral community views this issue.
Well, I think I agree entirely with what has been said about the potential of e-commerce. I think this potential, as far as cross-border e-commerce is concerned, business to consumer, there is a lot of potential to be realized. It's still in the very early stages. We're crawling. We're still a baby. There's a lot to be done. And I think that this potential of cross-border e-commerce needs the feedback of the international community. And it's not going to be governments alone. Governments alone are not going to do it. They need the feedback from the people on the ground. They need people like Jack Ma, big company, big platform, and Rags to Riches and others participating together, because they are the ones who understand the problems. They are the ones who see the challenges. They are the ones who see where the bottlenecks are. Governments don't. Governments still have rules and regulations that apply to the 20th century trade. That's gone. That's going to disappear. So we have to have the means to have this conversation. And that's why in Buenos Aires I was very excited to launch this initiative with EWTP and with the WEF, which will bring together not only governments, but also the private sector, academia, everybody sitting together to figure out the way forward. If we cross our arms, e-commerce is going to be the exclusivity of the big companies, of the big guys, because they're the ones who can go through this myriad of bureaucracy and tons of papers that you have to fill and high trade costs. If you want to make it inclusive, and that's where governments and communities win, we need to make it simpler. We need to make it more expedite, and that is the conversation that we have to have. Without it, it's going in the wrong direction.
Let me broaden the frame of the discussion for a moment. Here during this week in Davos, one of the top issues for debate is where trade policy is going. Are we going to seek additional restrictive measures? Are we seeing potentially more rivalry among trading blocs? And Jack, you have famously said, I think I read once, that when trade stops, war begins. How do you see the evolution of this debate, and what role do you think the e-commerce industry can play in helping matters?
Yeah, I think it is impossible to stop the trade. The world needs trade. Trade is supposed the way to solve wars. If the trade stops, the war starts. This is always I believe. Trade have to be changed, and WTO has done great job in the past years in order to making sure the world understand each other, in order to making sure the trade is an opportunity for everybody. But I think today the world is changed because of the new technology. I would say in the future there will be no made in China, no made in America, no made in Peru. It's going to be made on the internet. Mm-hmm. Young people connect to each other online. In the future, no matter you like or don't like, we will enable every young people, every small business to buy global, sell globally, and deliver globally, and pay globally, and travel globally, just maybe with a mobile phone, even with a passport. This is the trend. Nobody can stop it. So protectionism and globalization. I think globalization is a great thing. You should not kill the baby before even the baby was born. Mm-hmm. Today, globalization is a growing pain. And it's so easy to launch a trade war. But it's so difficult to stop the disaster of this war. And I'm scared and I'm concerned. I don't think the world should have don't use trade as a weapon. Use a trade as the solution to solve the problems. When you sanction the other country, you are sanctioning those small business, young people. They were killed. Just like you're bombing somewhere, civilization is gone. So we believe we should using the internet, using e-commerce, encouraging young people. The more trade we have, the more business will come up. There are hundreds of ways to solve the problem, but there's only one reason if you want to launch a trade war, it's easy. But I will say it takes about 30 years to fix that pain. So my view is we should not have a trade war, and we have a plenty of ways to solve the problem. And third, we should not let the world global trade controlled by 60,000 big companies. We should make technology, policies to encouraging 6 million or 16 million or 60 million business that can get benefit from small business. From small business like entrepreneurs from Philippines, they can sell globally. They can buy globally. This is the future, and it works.
So, much of the response to debate about rising restrictions is that we need to make our economies more inclusive. And I guess I would open it up to the panelists to talk a little bit about how they think this aspect of commerce, e-enabled commerce and investment, can help make the economy more inclusive, make trade more progressive or inclusive. Anyone care to comment? Yes, Prime Minister.
I would say from the point of view of a government, first, open markets. I totally agree. Just yesterday, the TPP was agreed without US, but the other 11 countries already agreed to have free trade among themselves, with trade facilitation, with investment facilitation, and helping each other. So that's very important. So some countries may think that reducing trade is good for them, but for us, many of us, we are very happy to have trade and cooperate. And most of us are in the Pacific area, so we believe that we can increase the possibilities of our SMEs. Second, I think we have to make easy for our firms to have digital knowledge, so we have to build capacities. We have to provide services through internet. So for example, in our country, we have Peru.gov, like our main instrument to connect with SMEs, so they can have easy registration, paying taxes, access to platforms of credit, facilitating the payment processes and reduce the cost. All the administrative procedures should be reduced, and then we can help them to be there. And of course, give information on what our other countries which we trade have as information that they will need to get into the other country. So I think we, as a government, has to help our enterprises to be promoted. Otherwise, it will be this market taking, but the big and large e-commerce retailers, and we don't want that. We want them to be moving, as you said, with other small firms all together. So this is something that we can have user-friendly and keeping people in touch with each other, and the government should be the trade facilitator in this case.
Yes.
So in the perspective of a social entrepreneur, I represent hundreds, even thousands of artisans who are in poverty. And when you are marginalized and when you're vulnerable, it comes with a lot of burden. It comes with a lot of gaps. So the technology definitely is a gap, logistics, absolutely, infrastructure, internet service, definitely. But also one of the biggest things that we've realized is education. So when we were starting, just as an example, we asked our artisans to source for animal print lining for our products because we're in fashion now, so we have to think fashion forward. So they sourced animal print lining and they came back to us with Winnie the Pooh, Spider-Man, and we were very shocked, but at the same time we realized that even if we speak the same language, we don't necessarily understand each other. And now that technology is really fast, there are lots of people who could get left behind. So I believe that we have to empower the entrepreneurs so that they can be the bridge and the connectors to communities who are in poverty, because e-commerce has the potential to link them to the market, definitely, but also to lift them out of poverty. We have such a big opportunity in our hands now. So we need to empower those who can make those connections.
Director General, we've just heard a list of very practical constraints. As I understand it, Therese, you sell 90% of your activity domestically, 10% export. And presumably part of the reason for that ratio is that you are encountering a number of very practical constraints. We know in the multilateral framework in the WTO, we don't yet have specific obligations and rules in detail in this area. And even 20% of regional trade agreements don't have a full-fledged set of cooperative frameworks and rules in this area. Can you reflect a little bit about how you see our initiative as an opportunity to move the ball forward while the formal negotiating process kind of catches up to what's happening on the ground in the market?
Yeah, I have to say this conversation is already happening in the WTO to some extent. One big element of this conversation is the digital divide. We know that about 4 billion people still don't have access to the internet. Small developing countries don't have the infrastructure. They don't have sometimes even electricity. So it's difficult to bring them on board. I can only imagine the kind of logistical difficulties that exist in the Philippines with so many islands and artisans in different places. So this is a big challenge, and I think you cannot think of e-commerce without thinking of how to integrate the small, the poor countries into this equation as well. So it's not something that you do only domestically, you have to think it globally. So another important thing that in the WTO we're trying to figure out is which are the main challenges, which are the ones that we have to address first. Because when you begin a conversation about e-commerce, it very quickly covers 1,000 different aspects. It's difficult to attribute priorities and say, let's take this first step. Let's do this first. And just now in Buenos Aires, we had more than 70 countries signing up a declaration that they will discuss the issue of e-commerce. They will try to set up a conversation that could lead in the future to negotiations. I think this initiative of enabling e-commerce by the WEF, the WTO, and the EWTP will allow us to frame the conversation that is going to happen. Because otherwise, people are going to sit around the table and they won't know what to do, because there will be so many things to handle that they will get lost in the forest. So we need to figure out the priorities, the challenges, and that can only come if you talk to the private sector, if you talk to the operators, the people who face the challenges. Otherwise, we're going to be lost. And that's what I hope this initiative will deliver.
Jack, you know, you have a rapidly mushrooming business. And indeed, by 2020, it's been estimated that e-commerce worldwide will be $1 trillion or more in value. Yet you're spending time in doing what Roberto just talked about, which is to be part of a process to get very concrete discussions between private sector, not just your firm, but many other firms, and governments to try to improve the enabling environment there. Tell me why you want to allocate your precious time to that type of endeavor.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is what this initiative about. We are very excited about partnering with WEF and WTO to promote the EWTP called Electronic World Trade Platform or Electronic World Tourism Platform. We think tourism, because of the cross-border trip, tourism is going to bring a lot of business opportunity for small business. But let me think this. It's very important for private sectors and public sectors to have a dialogue to discuss. I respect Azevedo's idea of positive thinking. Today, a lot of regulators worry too much. Oh my God, you got a security, you don't have enough this, enough that, you know, you worry this, worry that. When you worry, it comes. You don't worry, it comes, right? You like it, it comes. If you don't like it, it comes. Many years ago, 17 years ago, when I started e-commerce in China, people say, hey, China even don't have a PC, so why you have an e-commerce? Well, then nobody expect China suddenly become a country with so many mobile phones. Mm-hmm. Which is easier, to build the roads or build a mobile system? Build mobile system is much easier than build up the roads and infrastructures. I remember 1994, in the winter night in Beijing, a group of experts of IT and internet expert. I was confused. 1994, there is internet experts. Gathered together, think about how to regulate internet. I was in that meeting. And then after like 2 hours debating, they have a lot of worries. So 20 years passed. All the things those people worried never come up. All the things they don't worry about all come up. Let me tell you one thing. E-commerce is changing the way we do business. As I said, the traditional business is B2C. In the future is C2B, consumer to business. Most of the things are tailor-made. In the past, all the traditional cross-border business is go through containers. In the future, most of the business will go through packages. So the rules and laws will have a huge change. Today, from China to Russia, there's 1 million package from China to Russia. And without even consider how many packages from Russia to China. But even 1 million packages from China to Russia per day, think about it. 5 years ago, We launched a campaign, only 80,000 packages from China to Russia. The whole Russia post office system crashed. Today, 1 million, no problem. Government is learning. People are learning. Entrepreneurs are learning. When there is a demand, there is a way. So I think government should not think about how to regulate. The way government think about regulate is the way they think about 30 years ago. When I talk a lot of government officers, the first thing they think about is, how can I regulate? I hope next 30 years, the first thing to think about, how can I help? What shall we change to making sure our young people, our small business, our trade can in and out smoothly? This is the positive thinking. So I said in Argentina, whether you like it, we will do it. You don't like it, we will do it, right? Because this thing is coming. And the hope of making this thing good is work with young people, work with the smart government officers, organizations. Let's push, let's talk. Anything comes up, don't worry, there is a way. If you are not smart, there are smart people there. This is my belief.
So that's the spirit bottled in one piece of what this initiative is about. It's, there are a series of practical obstacles, as you just described, e-payments, e-signatures, consumer protection, customs, logistics, and whatnot. These are not solely the province of regulation, I think is your point. And so the process that you've just articulated so well is a very practical solutioning one. And I'm happy to say, Prime Minister, that there are early discussions between the initiative and the Pacific Alliance and the Inter-American Development Bank of potentially supporting such a very practical process in the region. And I just want to signal appreciation and give you an opportunity to talk about how you see the Pacific Alliance moving forward in this regard.
I think the Pacific Alliance, which is growing now because we are not only 4 right now, we're going to be 8 very soon, because Canada, Australia, Singapore, and New Zealand probably will be joining the Pacific Alliance, is another way to address the issue with cooperation and learning across each other, because it's very interesting the processes each country can bring given their own experiences. So this is an interesting way to address the issue. As you mentioned, young people are the ones who are creating the new things. I can remember my daughter's thesis for her graduation as a business professional was trading art through internet, and she prepared a special application where you can trade art for young people, which is so hard to get in the galleries, and they are so expensive, So these young people are creating things, and I'm sure young people across all these countries can create this development, because these young people, are the millennials, are the ones who are pushing ahead our trade. In just a couple of years, Peru growth in terms of e-commerce grew like almost 200%. In a couple of years. And we think this process will be steadily growing 30% each year as a minimum. So it's because these young people are moving in that direction. We are improving broadband, and we have to work all together in creating these spaces of growth among ourselves.
Thank you. We've reached the end of our time. Will you join me in thanking with appreciation the great panelists we've had here today? Thank you, audience. I wish everyone a good remainder of the day.